Our higher order purpose is to radically empower innovators to build an inspired future. And so the two dimensions I think of as deeply connected, which is we want to empower innovators to go on and solve great problems in the world, but do it in a way that is creating a global startup renaissance, a movement that is in support of. And so we need to do it better and well and all of that, but the scale at which we operate, we support hundreds of entrepreneurs a year with a network of thousands of individuals. And as a CEO of a nonprofit, I think keeping that purpose and mission front and center is so important because it's how we inspire the greatest people in the world to come join us in all the ways that they can join us to create this unbelievable future.
Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of the CEO Podcast. I'm your host, Mario, together with my co-host and partner, Professor Robert Hargrove, where we talk with today's CEOs. Our mission and our goal is to educate other CEOs on how to be better leaders and better people, but how to run their businesses better. Today, we have Caitlan Brummeb. I hope I pronounced it correctly. She is the CEO of MassChallenge. Kate, welcome to the show.
Mario, Robert, thank you so much for having me. Really excited to be here.
Yeah, no problem. Tell us about yourself. Tell us about your educational background. Where did you grow up? And kind of how did those early experiences prep you for where you are today?
Sure. So I'll try not to go too far back, but some context. I was born in the United States, right outside of New York. Had the chance to move to London early on, so a formative time of my life that I think we can come back to, but gave me huge interest in what's happening outside of the U.S. Moved back and attended Princeton, where I was a scholar athlete. So I was studying.
Which sport?
I played lacrosse at the time. We went to the national championships. I was two-time captain, and I mentioned that, obviously proud, but in the context of leadership, I think certainly a major driver of where I started to think of myself as a leader, learn some hard lessons about what that looks like in different contexts. And then also on the academic side, studying leadership in public policy, specifically how you bring people together in new and novel ways to try and get big, hard things done. At the time, there was rising interest in the role of business in society, and so that's where I spent a lot of my academic time. Graduated Princeton, and my dad said, "You got to get a real job and learn some great skills." I went into consulting and spent about 2 years splitting my time between the education sector practice, where I was most passionate, and then private equity, where I was perhaps most challenged. Raised my hand to join a hedge fund they were launching because it felt like some of the most challenging work that I could do right during the Great Recession. And then a couple years in, decided to go back to business school, really to transition into the career that I was most passionate about. I wanted to find a way to work at the intersection of purpose and business policy and the private sector, and spent most of business school studying a bit and really networking to figure out what was out there that I could apply my skills to, and testing a couple hypotheses and learning that I wanted to be in smaller organizations than bigger organizations where I could really have an impact, not on the end outcome, but on the organization itself. I joined a startup organization called Social Finance, not the big financial services company on the West Coast. It was a nonprofit based in Boston that was putting together really unique structured products to help nonprofits scale.
So tell us a little bit about social finance, right? I mean, I did a little bit of poking around, mobilizing investments for social progress, right? And if you
That's
could
right.
correct me if I'm wrong. And again, you are today in a nonprofit that is helping fairly young entrepreneurs. So tell us a little about this social finance. What was your role in? What were your leadership challenges? But also, what did you learn from this?
Oh, yeah. Fantastic. I learned so much. So I worked for the CEO and eventually for our head of capital markets, spending years structuring projects that would bring high net worth and foundation capital into investment vehicles that let nonprofits scale. We'd measure their outcomes, and the government would pay back the investors if they achieved the certain measure of success.
Oh.
Super wonky, extremely hard to scale. But I learned some major things. I think one was sitting at the intersection of all of those different actors was just the importance of finding the common ground and translating across different languages, almost like literally what the government speaks and the private sector speaks, how they think about their incentives is totally different. And I think that how do you find common ground? How do you bring people together? How do you push when you need to and
Yeah.
give when you
Well,
don't?
well, if you think about it, this is how most sales functions, right? You are trying
Mhm.
to find common ground and speak the
Yep.
language of your customer. But also, if you go a little bit deeper, and I think Robert can comment on this better than both you and me, when you are in a large organization, every department kind of speaks its own
Different
language, right?
language.
Robert?
Mhm. Well, Rob, maybe I'll add a couple thoughts. One is I have a deep-seated belief that the lines are just blurrier than we're led to believe, and that doesn't mean that the answers
Well,
are
what? So
obvious or
what?
easy.
So what do you mean by that?
Well, I
Lines
think
are
if
blurrier.
I think, for example, the vast majority of individuals working in healthcare are deeply purpose and mission motivated.
Hmm.
And that when and if you allow them to work in ways that maximize certain positive outcomes for the patient, they're going to do that because that's core to what they are. And where we have to tinker at times is with the models or the incentives. In my case, leading early stage startups, maybe they need new tools or technologies or solutions, but that if we assume there's a big, bright line that separates impact that's in the nonprofit sector and growth that's in the private sector, that we won't realize our full collective potential. And say that that's not in all instances. So I also believe that there are trade-offs and in lots of different dimensions. And so this is not to push that all businesses should be focused on this, but more to say that there are different ways they can be. And I'm personally most intellectually interested in different ways we work together that provide the most opportunity for people to realize their potential on a number of different dimensions, whether that's Robert changing the world through coaching while making an amazing business and living around it, or working with a direct service entrepreneur who's trying to get a really hard business off the ground.
Yeah. Well, funny you should mention all of that. I think the Nordic model, especially Norway, Sweden, Denmark, they've been doing this. Especially their corporations have been doing exactly this for maybe not a long time, but a fair amount of time, right? So
Mhm.
whatever business they're in, they always try to figure what is the social or socioeconomic component to the business that we are running. We have to make money because out of that money we pay our employees, we pay our taxes, which then fund a whole bunch of different programs. But how are we doing good, right? And that's kind of been, I think, more and more companies are going down that route. At least from what I'm seeing, Europe, maybe a little bit of East Coast, right? I don't know. You work with a lot more entrepreneurs that are in early stages. So, what do you
What are we?
see? Are they focused on creating a business, creating, as Robert says, creating a legendary company, or there's kind of a dual component to it?
I think certainly there are interesting differences between Europe and the US as well that are reflected in sort of how we see entrepreneurs. But from where I sit, the vast majority of entrepreneurs want to build transformational businesses that are also good for the world, for their shareholders, for their stakeholders. I think there are big differences of opinion in the extent to which companies should have a social values perspective, especially in this moment in the US. I think that is more controversial than it was historically. And though, when you sit with entrepreneurs or even CEOs and talk about what it means to build real legacy, enduring value, and Robert, I'd be interested in your perspective on this since you work with big companies, but we have large partners and small companies sort of all in our ecosystem. And the vast majority would say that if you're not deeply thoughtful about how you bring value to them and to your talent on multiple dimensions, that you will not create the enduring customer relationships, the enduring talent relationships, the brand authenticity that you need to thrive over long periods of time. And that some like to call that ESG, some don't want to touch ESG with a 10-foot pole, but it really is. And I think that is a very long arc trend that I've seen in my career and that I think will endure even with sort of the bumps in the conversation where we are today. The Business Roundtable. Yep. Friedman, no?
Yeah. No, it's Friedman. Friedman's doctrine. So it's called Friedman's doctrine. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, only goes so far. Let me be really clear. The companies have to get funded. I mentioned this about 15% of the companies that we work with, and
Our
for your
bootstrap.
audience, I
Yeah.
lead a global network of startup accelerators that support startups over their early stage life cycle. And I was making the point that we are deep believers that financial capital gets a lot of the limelight, but is insufficient, and that social capital, knowledge capital, human capital, access to new networks and customers is just as critical, in some case more critical, but certainly not to the exclusion of capital. So about 15% of the companies we work with are funded through revenue, in which case access to customers is mission critical. But the rest do go on to raise non-dilutive or dilutive capital, majority from venture capital.
Mm.
We're proud that our alumni have raised over 14 billion in follow-on funding. So we are not anti-venture, but we believe our role in supporting early stage growth and development is really focused on the social capital piece. And part of that's opening doors to the type of capital that they want to raise for their business. So we were, talking about the change in narrative. And my belief is that CEO founders may want to build different types of businesses, and in which case it's important for there to be resources, support systems that help them explore not just a standard venture route in some cases where that may be a better fit.
I have a question that I think our audience would appreciate, and goes back to the name of the podcast, which is the CEO podcast. So, Robert and I always talk about two crucial things for every CEO. And this question is now to Kate, who's the CEO of MassChallenge, right? So, number one, your first 100 days, right? That's number one. And if you could talk a little bit, so how did you approach it? What are the roadblocks? What are the challenges that you overcome in these first 100 days? And then, second, and I think we will explore this a little bit more, is your executive team, right?
It's great.
CEOs rise and fall because of their executive team. So executives, right? And Robert and I call them enterprise leaders. So A players can do it all, but also team. Can they work as a team? Right. So
Mm-hmm.
I thrown a lot. I've thrown two questions at you.
Personal days.
Yeah, first for executive team, correct.
Great. Oh my God. Well, first, I wish I'd met you two and heard your two key points before I took over, but
It's
they
not
really
too late.
resonate.
It's not
Yeah,
too
it's
late.
not too late. So maybe a little bit of context. I moved into the CEO role unexpectedly. So as part of long-term succession planning, got a call from the former CEO whose mother had fallen ill and said, it's time. I need to go do other important work and I want to recommend you to the board. So that was one key context. And by the way, this is going to happen in like 6 weeks. And then the second was it was coming out of COVID, which had been a massive disruption for the world, for most organizations, and then for our organization as largely a in-person driven, gone fully virtual, opening a new office. So I share that context because my first 90, 100 days were really focused on three things. One was communicating, instilling, emphasizing both continuity and confidence for our team, for our stakeholders, for our equivalent of customers, that even in the face of a leadership change that had been unexpected, we were prepared. And that I was excited and was excited with the board. So that was one, and I can share sort of more about that. The second was emerging from COVID. We were opening a new office with
Oh,
energy and ambition to come back in a way that really, put our flag back in the soil. And then the third was I had a perspective on where I wanted to take the organization, as most CEOs do. And so to do the work to prepare the board for that, and then to assess my leadership team and figure out what changes I would want to make, if any, to prepare us for the next phase of work. So those were the three things I was most focused on,
mm.
probably in that order, in the first 90 days.
And your executive team. So tell us a little bit about your. Did you inherit? Did you hire? How are you working currently with them? One of our guests, and he's kind of a friend of a program, retired, a former CEO. He built a $5 billion company and then exited. Tom Kaiser, he says, as a CEO, I spent 85% of my time making sure we are aligned, just
Hmm.
focusing on alignment, right? Constantly. So
Yes.
talk to me a little bit about your, and if you don't want to name anyone, your executive team, and did you inherit, did you create it, and a little bit about that.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So I did inherit a team that I anticipated making changes to on a couple dimensions. One was I wanted a flatter team. I
Oh.
operate motivated and energized by knowing what's going on, being able to work in a hands-on way where it's appropriate to support my leaders. And so our prior CEO had really just a three-person executive team, and I wanted to flatten to 7 or 8 so that I had more touch points with more members of the organization. We're just not that big. And as part of that, also drive an organizational change in sort of how we were structured and what went where. And so part of that has meant making those strategic changes and then building the team that's prepared to have an impact on the organization in that new dimension. So about 60% of our leadership team today is relatively new. The last 2 or 3
Oh.
years, it's been exciting to rebuild a team, also with the longer term frame in mind, and for individuals to succeed under our new order. And what your friend and former guest Tom mentioned really resonates on a bunch of dimensions and has been a lesson that I've been learning as a first time CEO, and also in partnership with an amazing organization called Talentism, which focuses on clarity as sort of the key measure of success for a CEO and for the individual. And I think we've done a lot of work. I can go into the tactics around how do you drive alignment on a weekly, monthly, quarterly, annual basis for us without giving up what inspires the people I hire, which are builders. So MassChallenge is attractive to people who want to build. And so we need to give them enough capacity to put their imprint on the organization to be able to advance innovative projects without losing alignment and having, a
Yeah.
free-for-all of entrepreneurs under one heading.
Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead.
Warning lights? Uh-oh, like, yep. Robert, when I heard the sort of 85% of my time on alignment, I put our external stakeholders into that camp because in our case, we have our startups. We think of our beneficiaries in the nonprofit sense. They are access our resources for free, and those resources are funded by government, by philanthropists, by large corporate partners, each with distinct interests in what we do. Governments care a lot about economic vibrancy, competitiveness, cluster development. Our donors care a lot about the economic mobility, the progress that can come through entrepreneurship. Often they've personally lived that journey and want to give back in material ways. And then our corporate partners actually have a business strategic interest in being proximate to innovation and learning how to engage even more efficiently, effectively to accelerate whatever their agenda may be. And so having alignment with each of them, being able to communicate how what we are doing supports and reinforces those objectives, bringing back their objectives into our plan is really critical in addition to the work working across our organization, whether it's the programmatic heads in Switzerland, Israel, and the US, ensuring that we're aligned and then sharing the autonomous lessons learned, or more classic marketing and sales, that is equally important work in addition to the external. Oh, yeah, so great. So externally, our work is ahead of our brand. So if and I'll say that differently. We are really known. Yeah,
Well,
so
what is
we
that?
are.
What does that mean? That
Yeah.
sounds like you open a book and says MBA phrases to use when asked difficult questions.
Oh, well, I mean, I don't know that I get credits, but it's an
No, no,
MBA
I'm
speak.
joking. I'm joking. I'm joking. I'm joking.
Yeah, what I mean is that we have not told our story and our evolution, like our evolutionary story, effectively enough to our external stakeholders. So many
Mm.
still know and love MassChallenge for what we were in our founding years. And I think that is a huge opportunity and need for us if we want to have them not only come alongside, but amplify our big, ambitious
Ah.
goals. So that's on the external. And I think we are not doing a good enough job with our sort of storytelling. Internally, our data is really clear on this because of our work with this organization called Talentism. For us, the biggest gap is around responsibility and speed of execution. And when you have that misalignment, which we're improving on, but we do, is you a lot of people that are working in parallel on similar stuff. And so you're not getting the maximum benefit of their amazing energy and creative energy pulling in one direction. And so that's what we're most focused on internally, is that clarity and alignment, both around what we're doing it, how fast we're doing it, and what success looks like coming out.
Yeah.
Oh, What's the difference between team builder and coach, just out of curiosity? Okay. So I don't have to put myself in one of those 3 buckets. Is the 3rd one, yeah. To me, leadership and CEO, it's a journey. And so I'll reference back when I was an athlete, that was really informative to my first 20 years as a leader and even early times as CEO, where for me, it was all about balancing. You create credibility through your individual contribution. So if you're not the hardest working, one of the most proactive communicators, team first, you don't have the credibility to lead, and you have to balance that lead from in front, lead from behind. I think that's a core framework. Some refer to it as servant leadership for me. And the servant leadership, I would put myself naturally in that arena, and I really believe in it. And I think what I've learned in my first 3 years as CEO is there is also a time where it is important and it's actually more effective, regardless of whether that's your core strategy, to be highly directive, to create clarity, to drive faster decision making, to take on with 100% visibility the hardest decisions. And so that, I would say, I've added that to my toolkit with a lot of intention over the past couple of years. Still making sure I bring my authentic self, which is we sit in a flat organization. I'm often the first here. I don't mind being the last to go. There's no work that's above me or below me if something has to get done. We're a 70-person organization, and so I think how you show up has particular impact in an organization of this
Yeah.
size and scale. I like to hear, and I believe it's important to hear lots of voices. From a stylistic perspective, that's where I would start. And there are times where, from a toolkit perspective, you have to be ready to deploy the glorious bastard and be skillful enough in it to bring it to bear. Mm,
Yeah. Yeah.
yep. The answer is no, but we obviously share brand love with them, and it's an amazing organization. I've personally ridden in the Pan Mass Challenge, but we are very distinct organizations, very distinct missions. Hmm. Mm. Yeah, I mean, Robert, I absolutely love this because our higher order purpose, we would say, is to radically empower innovators to build an inspired future. And so the two dimensions I think of as deeply connected, which is we want to empower innovators to go on and solve great problems in the world, but do it in a way that is creating a global startup renaissance, a movement that is in support of. And so we need to do it better and well and all of that, but the scale at which we operate, we support hundreds of entrepreneurs a year with a network of thousands of individuals. And that's absolutely the two prongs of those stories. And as a CEO of a nonprofit, I think keeping that purpose and mission front and center is so important because it's how we inspire the greatest people in the world to come join us in all the ways that they can join us to create this, unbelievable future.
Being the ambassador,
Yeah, the evangelist.
the
Well, I
evangelist.
spend 85% trying to get alignment, so it's less than 85%. But I think you have hit on, something that is so important for, I think, many CEOs to think about, which is in the context of your purpose, in the context of your strategy, your unique skill sets, where do you need to be deployed? And your instincts, which I think are coming through in your question, we agree with, which is that more time telling the story is as important as driving that, alignment with what we're doing, because it's the why that makes many, many people want to be involved in important ways.
Yeah, and Mario is very good at creating a manifesto. He's creating a manifesto for us. But I was thinking if you had a manifesto that said your why, your vision, your what, as well as your how, it could be pretty compelling.
Fantastic.
All right. Kate, it's been a pleasure. Phenomenal conversation. I hope you got something out of it. We certainly did. Thank you for being our guest today.
Thank you for having me. It's been a great conversation.
Until next time, please make sure to like and subscribe if you're looking at us on YouTube, or if you're catching us on other platforms, try to do the same thing. Goodbye.